Howdy, howdy, I'm Toast, and welcome back to my channel. I know it's been a minute, I apologize for that, but I have been kind of busy, weirdly, all of my own doing. But I'm here today to bring you a very simple, I'm assuming going to be small video. I don't imagine this is going to take very long. I just wanted to do a little bit of a tutorial, question mark. I don't really think of myself as someone who is adept at giving tutorials. But I'm going to try because I have a method of drawing like flora that I really like, and I thought that maybe somebody else would like this as well. Especially if you're someone that does line art on your drawings. I find that drawing plants is really, I wouldn't say it's difficult, but it is. I feel like if you're doing a completely flat art style, then doing line art on your plants is so like, okay, that looks great. And then I feel like, you know, if you're doing cartoony, obviously, but then if you're trying to do like more of like a rendered piece that's like in between, you know, line art and no line art, I feel like doing plants could be really difficult, especially if you're someone like me where you are someone that prefers to really flesh out all the details of a plant. I know a lot of comic artists and stuff will just do like quick little scribbles, you know, for plants. They'll just go like whoop 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 whoop, you know, and then, you know, they'll go and color it like that. And that's fine. It's just not my preferred way because, I don't know, I get really in my head about, okay, well, I need to draw this leaf, and then I need to draw this leaf, and they need to connect just like that. And I'm just, you know, I like the way it looks, but I don't like the time it takes. And also sometimes don't like the way it looks, actually. So I've been experimenting a lot with how to draw flora, and this also sort of goes over into drawing afro texture hair as well, which was not what I was expecting when I went into this. But if you want to see how I draw that, you can ask in the comments, I guess, and I'll make a video on that as well. But for now, let's just delve into how I draw flora. I have a couple of references pulled up here because references are always your best friend. Always look at references. That's just the best suggestion I can do for you. However, sometimes I am a bad artist and I don't look at references, so I think the first thing I'm going to do is show you just how I draw general plants. You know, just an ambiguous plant that is not supposed to be inspired from anything particularly. So the first thing you want to do is you need to have a lovely little lasso tool like this. If you're an artist that is not taken, you know, full use of the lasso tool, you're missing out, all right? I didn't for the longest time, and then I started doing exercises where I would create characters based off of silhouettes that I created with the lasso tool, and it kind of, I don't know, it changed my life or something. I don't know. I can create characters like so much quicker now, and I feel like they have a lot more personality. That's besides the point, though. The point is I've become familiar with this bad boy right here, the lasso tool, and in doing so, I have experimented a lot and come up with, I say come up with, I'm sure a cajillion other artists do it exactly like this. It just sprung into my brain, you know. So yeah, I'll just show you right over here. I'm gonna do some just like ambiguous, like, we'll do a couple, Let's first off do like an ambiguous, just like singular, you know, stalk of a plant. And for that I would do sort of something like this right here. Okay, it got a little thick in the center, and I don't really like that, so I'm just gonna clean that up a little bit. And I think, yeah, that looks pretty good. And you can always go in and adjust this even more if, you know, you're like, maybe I want to leave right there, you know, or maybe I want this to go up higher and end in like a little bud or something like that. So here is our ambiguous shape of a plant. And maybe I'll add actually like a little offshoot over here. Okay, there we go. Ambiguous plant. Now, there are several ways that you can go about this. First off, I'm going to choose a lovely color here. I'm just going to color pick from one of these because I'm not good at colors. So there's a couple things you can do. Number one, you can just fill this in. All right, you fill it in. You have this lovely shape right here. It's a little messy around the edges, but you can go ahead and clean it up, or you can just not, because who cares? Because it's a plant. Unless it's like the focal of your illustration, then maybe you want to clean it up. But for me, most of the time, the plants are sort of in the background or like the very foreground, so it's like they're not the centerpiece of the illustration. Now, I do like the way that this looks right here with just like the flat colors, but I'm going to show you my preferred way, which is I go over to my pencils, I take an ambiguous pencil, it doesn't matter, just make sure it has texture. You just want something that has texture. I use the Artemis HP, which is what I normally use for sketching and stuff like that, so that's just what I use. And then I make it a little bit of a larger size than what I intend. And then I just color it in. But I try not to press too hard because we want to keep the graininess. We want to make sure that there are see-through parts of this plant. And then we can just go ahead and get rid of this. And as you can see, it's up to you personally, but I much prefer the one that is textured. I think that it looks so much nicer. It sort of gives that softness that plants have, and I really prefer it. Now, if this is just going to be like one part of a whole plant, you can just leave it like this. If this is going to be like the entire plant in itself and you want to give it a little more je ne sais quoi, you can go in and, of course, just add in some extra colors and bits here, Maybe we want these buds to be, like, actually, a budding flower, so we'll just change those to be yellow. And I just have alpha lock on over here, so all of that wonderful texture still stays. So that's how I would do, like, a singular plant. I'm going to show you how I do a bush next. Now, bushes are going to take, in my case, they're going to take more layers. Yours doesn't necessarily have to. You can do it all on one layer if you'd like. I'm not that artist. All right, I ain't that girl. I don't want to do it all in one layer. So the first thing I do, and I typically like to actually start with the foreground, which is why I don't like doing it all in one layer, is because if you do it in one layer, you have to start with the background. But I prefer working in the foreground. So I'm going to make an ambiguous bush here, okay? The first thing I'm going to do is make a whole bunch of random shapes that are like vaguely like leaves sticking out, And I know that I want my bush to be round, so I'm keeping that in mind as I do this. Typically, I would actually have like a sketch underneath, like a really bad sketch of what the plant would look like. It was mainly just like blobs and shapes, but I kind of like that I don't even need it for this method to work, actually. Okay, let's say that this is good for now. And we can always go back and adjust it later, it's fine. I'm just going to take kind of the same green that I had before, I don't really mind, and we're just going to color that in. Make sure that we have the texture, alright? Now, if some of these like sharp edges bother you, you can either go in and erase those, or you can just be more careful when you're doing your lassoing here. I don't care. I'm going to be honest with you, I so do not care, alright? I like making art, but I like making it quicker more, so that's just personal preference, though. So now that we have the sort of foreground layer of our bushes done, of our leaves done, we're going to go ahead, we're going to select a darker color. Now, also, if you want, you can do this entirely in black and white, and then go choose the colors later, or put a gradient map on top of it, if that's more your style. I typically just do the actual colors themselves, and I do it sort of in tandem when I'm doing my line art, so I'll have, like, my line art of my character, which is just, black and white, and then I'll have the colors for the leaves. It can get a little confusing if you do it like that, but for me, I have not found it to be so bad. Now, typically on your under layers here, you can be a little more messy. It doesn't really matter because you're not going to see as much of it. So I probably should have been cleaner with my top layer, but for a quick tutorial, I don't really mind. All right, that looks pretty good to me. So I'm going to go ahead and fill that in, just like that. And you can also make the under layers of your bush get denser so they have less of that texture. So there's less like light poking through, you could say. And I'm just going to be really messy with our very bottom layer here and just give it a couple of leaves like poking out here and there. I'll make that even darker. I kind of want there to be like more down here at the bottom. I don't think I stretched this out enough. There we go. That's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with our ambiguous bush here. However, we can definitely still make it like way better. The first thing we can do is go up here and I'm just going to create like an even lighter color here, and I'm just gonna go through and make some even brighter leaves right where the light is catching, and I'm thinking the light's coming in from this side. So let's go ahead and fill it. All right, that's pretty good. And then of course we want some darker colors here, so I'm actually gonna choose sort of an in-between color between these two, so right about there. And I'm okay, I think, if this goes in front. We can always change it later if we don't like the way it. Let's go ahead and choose a couple of dark leaves here. Okay, what do we think? Yeah, I think them going on top works well. Now, you can take this even a step further. I don't know if I would, just for like a singular bush. But hey, if the singular bush is your focus point, you can spend as much time on this and make it look as nice as you want. But we could take this a little bit further and make like a multiply layer right here, and we can just like shade this like you would a circle, because bushes are circles. So just do something like that, and then I would go in and you can go in and cut out some leaf shapes, because a bush is a sphere, but it's not a perfect sphere. So just making it have a little bit of a jagged edge there, and then you can do the same with like a light layer if you want. So you can do something just like that. And honestly, I think that's a pretty successful bush. I think that looks really nice, actually. Now, let's say you don't want an ambiguous plant. For that, you're going to need your references, obviously, or, your general memory of what that plant looks like. For me, let's start with this Monstera up here, because I think there's a couple ways you could tackle this. You could just start by drawing out the Monstera itself and doing, things like this right here. I got a little lazy on the left side, ignore me. So you could do something like that. I think that my preferred method would honestly just be more like to do something like this. Yeah, something like that I think would be my best bet. It doesn't have to be perfect, although I think those are cutting in a little close to the center there, so we'll clean that up. And then once you have your leaf the way that you like it, you just color it in. Now, when you're doing something like this, I especially like making the edges of the leaves here, the areas where it gets like the least dense. So these areas sort of have like the most texture. That's just what I prefer. And then, you can go in and you can color this to your heart's content. And since the texture is already there, just like with the brush itself, you can just like go in with like an airbrush or something to do these details. And you would kind of just, you could just repeat this process for each Monstera leaf. You could also just pull the lazy art method here, where you just copy the first Monstera leaf you made and overlap it on top of other ones. And then I would personally go in and just like adjust the size of this ever so slightly. You don't want to do crazy because your art might get a little blurry and stuff doing this. However, I find that typically when you're doing this with colors, it comes off a lot less abrasive than if you were to do like line art. Like if you did line art and adjusted it, it would be like, a lot more affected by the blurriness of Liquify tool. But when you're just doing it with colors, I feel like it's a lot better. And you can also create other variants and stuff. I would suggest that whatever you have on top, you go underneath and create, some multiplies, you can either do it like this, where you just airbrush a multiply layer on, or you can also just like duplicate the layer that you just created on top and merge that down to the layer below, fill it in with your multiply color of choice. For me, I'm doing blue, and then just like offset it. And then that'll give you more of a drop shadow. And you can also just combine the two as well. And if you're finding that this feels a little too see-through for you, like you can also duplicate the layers and merge them down, and it'll be a little more dense. And for something like a Monstera leaf, those are already pretty dense, so I think it's okay to have them be a little more on the fuller side. So I like the way that looks. I do want to cover something really quickly, and I'll talk about it a little bit as well when we get to the strawberries, which is that I think that melding this with a line art style looks good. All right, I have a line art style, and I do lineless plants and stuff. But if you really do want line art, and this is something that I do very specifically with like afro textured hair and stuff like that, is what you can do is first of all, I do it like this, where I draw out my plants or whatever I'm doing with this method, right? And then I would go in and add line art afterwards. And I wouldn't fill in the line art entirely. My characters have their line arts like completely touching, but for a plant, I wouldn't do that because I think it takes away from what a plant is. So if you'd like line art, you can still do it just like this. Especially, I would say you want to leave the areas where the plant is getting light with less line art and the area where the plant is in shadow with more line art. So I would say like over here is where you would want like the most like connected line art pieces. So I went ahead and finished the line art, so now you can see sort of a comparison between the two Monstera leaves of what it looks like without line art and what it looks like with. It's kind of personally, it's up to personal preference. I like the way both of them look, actually. I don't necessarily know if this line art would be something that I did for these sorts of plants, like down here. One, because I'm lazy, and this is a lot of things to go around. But two, because I feel like the plants that are down here are much more like, these are background points that are not meant to be focused on, whereas I feel like if you're like going out of your way to make a specific kind of plant, like a Monstera leaf or something like that, whether or not it's the focus of the piece itself, you still went out of your way to make a real plant instead of something that was ambiguous. So you might want your attention drawn more to this. I think we're kind of understanding now the general premise of how I do this. I'm going to talk about flowers really quick. Like, flowers are kind of just like the exact same process, but they can be a little more complicated depending on what kind of flower you do. So let's talk about these lovely lily of the valley. One of my favorite flowers of all time, fun fact. And I've been doing like one, like one leaf at a time or something like that. I'm not going to do that right now. For lily of the valley, there's a whole bunch of bells next to each other, right? So I'm just gonna do a couple of these at the forefront here. All right, so we've got a couple of little guys here. I'm just gonna go ahead and we're gonna fill these in with our bright white here. One thing that I also like to do, I don't think I've mentioned it yet, is I prefer to have the base of the object be more dense than the outer sides. I think I said that with the leaves actually, but I think it gives the feeling that the edges of these are a lot softer. I also don't like how sharp this is actually. I'm just gonna go ahead and round that. If this was like just like a background flower, like way off in the distance, I wouldn't really care. Yeah, there we go. And then you just shade these as you would any other object. I am gonna look at the reference a little bit here. I also find that because you're doing this like with a textured brush, you sort of have more leeway to be a little more messy with your rendering. Like it doesn't matter as much if your rendering is like super nice. Now I'm going to create a separate layer here for the stem. Now the stem, lily of the valley typically just have like one stem with a whole bunch of bells sticking off of it. So that's what I'm going to create here. Something more like this. You also want to make sure to leave a lot of negative space in between your objects, especially if they're close together. Like we're leaving a little bit of negative space right here to distance this stem from this one, because we are going to add like a little bit of shading to it, but because we're not defining it with lines or anything, we really have to rely on the brain just sort of making connections between pieces. Now I'm going to go ahead and fill all of this in, even though I definitely want some of these stems to be behind flowers and some of them to be in front. But for now, I don't really care about that. I'm going to grab a lovely color here, and we're going to fill that in. And then basically what I'm just going to do is I'm going to grab this layer right here, and I'm just going to erase on the stem layer where I do not want, which is right about there. And I think everything else is pretty okay. Now there's definitely a couple of portions of this where I'm not like super happy with it, so I'm just going to grab the liquify tool and fix those. The liquify tool is your friend. It's definitely important to know how to do things without tools, but it's also important to know when you should save time and when you should actually put in effort into something to fix it properly. There we go. I'm pretty happy with that. Now I'm just going to go ahead and color this in. It looks like the parts that actually meet up with the flowers themselves are a little bit lighter. I think it's a little hard to see with my gray background here, so I'm going to make these actually a little bit even lighter. And then we'll just go up here and do that. And then just for a little more interest, I'll make this part even darker, and I'll do the same right here where these meet, and maybe a little bit behind the flower. Still not super happy with the way these flowers look, but I think it's fine. I'll just liquefy them. In general, I just find this a much quicker way of drawing plants too, because if I were to like sketch this out and then do the line art for it, I would just be sitting here being like, okay, I need to go, ooh, let me choose a color you can actually see. I need to just do like a little, okay, let me do this, oh, and let me not do this, and let me do this. But you also have to do the sketching for it and everything. And I feel like line art is less forgiving. Because I feel like now you can really tell that, oh, this part is like way thicker, right? And it's not like the same width all the way around, which it, sort of should be. But here it's like you don't even notice, I think if this were the forefront of my illustration here, I would probably give the stem a little bit of an outline. I think that if this were in the background, I wouldn't care. Especially if it was like mixed in with like other grasses and stuff, or a vase. I probably wouldn't do any line art on this flower specifically, just because this flower is white. Though you could also just change the color of your line art, which is something that I will sometimes do. Maybe we'll do like a tiny amount, like down here, just because this would be like the darkest spot, right? And then we can change. I'll show you what the line art looks like if we were to change the color of it. I'm just going to choose like a general, like a dark green here. I'm just going to go over the entire piece because most of this is going to be dark green. And then for the Lily of the Valleys, I'm going to choose just like a nice darker sort of yellowy color, maybe darker than that. Yeah, just something like that. And I think that that looks really lovely. And you could add more detail to these flowers if you wanted to. I don't really mind, especially because they'd be like way back here, So I wouldn't even add the line art onto them if I were doing that anyway. I probably wouldn't have put this much detail into the shading and all of that as well. I probably would have just let the regular sort of rendered shading that I do on an illustration piece speak for this as well. And what I mean by that is typically when I'm like doing an illustration, I'll do like you know, my flats, my blushes and all of that. And then I'll do like a multiply layer over top. And let's say that, you know, I would do just something like this in general. I probably wouldn't go out of my way to actually render these flowers. I would probably just do this with whatever lighting I wanted in my final piece. And I think that looks really, really lovely, actually. All right, since I think I've covered like literally like everything in terms of like flowers and leaves, I'm not gonna go over this reference right here. I think you've got the gist of it. I think I'm gonna do the strawberries though, just because those are a much denser object. Like those are an actual object, you know. Not that flowers and leaves aren't. I don't know how to describe it. Flowers and leaves are delicate. A strawberry, like, that's got some oomph to it, you know? Let's just do a lovely little strawberry shape. That's a horrendous strawberry shape, girl. Something like that. And then we'll grab our color here and fill that in. And for something like a strawberry, probably want the top part to be a little more dense, but I want the center to be as dense, to be more dense than the outside edge. And then we're just going to go in and quickly shade the strawberry really quick, like just so we can get a sense of volume here. And then I'm just going to grab probably a lighter reddish color here, and I'm just going to go through and add in all the seeds really quick. And always remember to follow the volume of whatever you're drawing. All right, I'd be happy with that. Also, if you want a quick way of making these seeds look like they are indented into the strawberry, instead of going around and adding in, you know, like a little shadow above every single strawberry, instead what I would suggest you do is just duplicate the layer with your seeds, go to the layer that's underneath, shift it up a little bit, and change the color to be darker. And now all of your strawberry seeds have a shadow on top. And you can do the same thing with the highlights as well. If you just go to the opposite side and change the color to be redder. Something just like that. Yeah. And I'm just going to go ahead and personally, I'm just going to merge all of those together. And don't forget to also make sure that your seeds are in the same lighting as your strawberry. Otherwise, they might look out of place. And before we do the line art of the strawberry, I'm just going to go through here and do these leaves really quick like. Alright, I did the leaves very quickly. Nothing crazy there. Now, for a strawberry, I would honestly just like line this completely normally. The way that I would line literally any other object, which is with no breaks. Just completely line it like that. Obviously, that doesn't look the most amazing with our leaves here. And I think the most important thing you want to remember is the areas like here where it meets the line art, you want there to be line art touching there at least. And in the places where the objects meet each other, like that. And the stem here, since this is also more of a solid object than these leaves are, I'm gonna break this line up less, except on the side that has light. That will break up a little bit more. And you can also go in and add in some line art around the seats if you'd also like. I don't know if it's necessarily something I'd like to do, but the option is there. Now, I also, this is like so irrelevant, but I really like the way that these like bright highlights look on the strawberries. So I'm just going to go through and add those in really quick. It's like the final finishing point. Yeah, I really like that. Also, completely unrelated to any of this, but if you want to make your highlights have a little more oomph to them, I personally recommend duplicating your highlight layer, going to just blurring it up just a smidge bit, and then putting it on whatever your layer mode of choice is. Glow dodge is a good one, color dodge is a good one, add glow, you know, all of that stuff. All of those are good. And then something personally that I like to do is grab a very saturated version of whatever the highlight color is, in this case red, it's a strawberry, and then put that on color dodge and turn it down. It just makes the highlight look like it's like glowing. I'm also going to do a little bit down here at the bottom, just for fun. I don't know why I did that. That has nothing to do with this tutorial. I just wanted to show you. I thought it'd be fun. And I mean, that's kind of like the basic gist of how I draw plants, and I really like the way that they've been looking. I'm really proud of them. Yeah, I can show you an illustration that I did recently that sort of features this method of planting that I do. Yeah, I hope that this was an adequate tutorial. Like I said, I'm not really much of a tutorial person, so I hope that you got something out of this. Like I said, I'm sure there's plenty of other artists out there who've done this exact same method before, but you know, maybe you haven't seen it before, and maybe you learned something new or got some inspiration how to improve your own art or draw something in a specific way. Thank you so much for watching. And I think with that, I'll catch you all in the next one. Bye!